So my name is Jonakee Reynolds, and I'm presenting on sustainable innovation and entrepreneurship. So how did I get here? Obviously, I'm interested in entrepreneurship, as some of you might have seen from the flyer. My major is entrepreneurship in society. So in college, I'm trying to learn what really you need to know in order to be successful as an entrepreneur. So one of the things that I've learned is that business model design is crucial to the success of a startup, and it dictates how you take your product or service to market. One of the things that can really give you a competitive advantage in entrepreneurship is innovation. That's a thing that a lot of entrepreneurs do. They'll innovate on their product or service, and that is what they get their advantage from. But another thing that you can innovate upon is your business model, and this is called business model innovation. Sometimes companies, they'll take their business model and change it around to make a newer novel, and then they take their product or service to market in a new way, and that's where they get their competitive edge. Another thing that's important to look at for business success is long-term success, because obviously you want your company to be successful in the long run. So sustainability has been known as one of the key factors for long-term business success. So right here I have a quote from Amit. It says, "A majority of executives believe that business model innovation is the most important type of innovation for new business success." This is a really interesting quote, because this means that executives think that it's more important to innovate on your business model than innovating on your product or your service. And that actually kind of got me started on this topic. So how are we going about this? I'm doing a scoping literature review, which basically just takes all of the relevant literature on the topic and compares it. It's just a really broad literature review. I'm using terms such as sustainability, innovation, startup, and issues to find my papers. Only using peer-reviewed sources and only using recent articles, although there were a couple articles that were really relevant to the field that were a little bit older that I had to include. So, sustainable business model innovation. What exactly is that? It's kind of a big term, and it's a bit of a mouthful. The answer is actually a little bit complicated. So there is no real definition of sustainable business model innovation, at least not one that is consistent across all of the current literature. The reason for this, there are a few, and one of them is that it's a really new field. It's really kind of been recognized as important and started to be researched on mainly in the last 15 years, and for that reason, there isn't a ton of research. And a lot of different papers have cited what exactly sustainable business model innovation is in different ways. So firstly, we're going to go over a few of these papers and what they say sustainable business model innovation is. So right here, from right to left, we have a few different papers and how they define sustainable business model innovation. So, or from left to right, my bad. First, we have Boons and Ludwig. They adopted a business model perspective, and then they analyzed sustainable innovation. And they quoted it as adaptation of the business model to overcome barriers within the company or its environment to market sustainable product, process, or service innovations. Now, that's a bit of a mouthful, and it's kind of hard to understand. But this next paper, Room and Lush, they looked at a couple case studies of businesses that transitioned to sustainable business models and saw kind of what gave them success. And they defined it as the ways in which companies can change their business models that can add to sustainable development. This is a lot easier to understand, but it doesn't really give much context as to what actually is going on within those business models. Like, we now understand kind of what it means, but if you were a business trying to do this yourself, you would have no idea of how to proceed. So then comes in the next paper, and forgive me if I butcher this name. I think it's Geisdorfer, but I'm not sure. Essentially, they combine design thinking and sustainable business model innovation to try and create a framework for how to develop a sustainable business model. So this was really designed at getting companies to be able to do this themselves. And they created this thing called the value ideation theory, where what you do is you see what value can be provided to whoever you're providing value to, whoever your consumers or people that your business does things for might be. And then you expand that to see what kind of value you can provide to your environment or society. So they define it as any business that provides value not only to themselves, but also the environment and society. But this is also kind of not a great definition, because there are ways that businesses could provide value to the society that aren't sustainable. So that doesn't necessarily mean that it's sustainable. So then comes in the next paper. Schalltiger defined it as new business models that create competitive advantages by creating positive externalities or reducing negative externalities. And the interesting part here to me was that they said that they create competitive advantages. That's a big part of it, is that the sustainability in this can be an incentive for companies to actually want to transition to be sustainable. Another thing that Schalltiger said that I thought was really interesting was that sustainable business model innovation is important to create sustainable development at the societal level, which makes a lot of sense. That in order to really get sustainable development on a larger scale, you need businesses to transition over as well. Yang also went at it from a very different perspective. They identified that there isn't that much research on it, but most of the research comes at it from a value perspective. And what Yang said is that the traditional context of value is too limited. It doesn't quite work for what they're actually trying to do. So they broadened it to this thing called value uncaptured. Value uncaptured is defined as the set of benefits that could have been captured but have not yet been captured. And so this paper takes this framework for companies to try and figure out how they have value uncaptured and where it is. And then they want them to capitalize upon it. So they define sustainable business models as companies that capitalize on their uncaptured values and create benefits for those around them. Now, there's one more paper that also tried to define sustainable business model innovation. And I wanted to go over this one just by itself because this paper sought to further the field by doing a literature review, and they developed sustainable business model archetypes. So that way you can kind of see what a sustainable business model is and what kind of things they would do. Those are maximizing material and energy efficiency, creating value from waste, substituting with renewables and renewable processes, delivering functionality rather than ownership, adopting a stewardship role, encouraging sufficiency, repurposing business for society and environment, and developing scale-up solutions. So from all of these various definitions, we can define sustainable business model innovation as innovation within the business model that changes the entirety of the business model to be structured around sustainability and helps the company gain its value uncaptured. Now that we have a bit of an idea of what sustainable business model innovation is, after reading all of these different definitions, we can now see that it's not very easy. This quote right here, most implemented sustainable business models, especially in the startup context, fail in the market. So what we've identified so far is that it's really important and executives believe that it's important. And it's also kind of hard to define, but we've got a general definition. But it usually fails in the market. And that's quite interesting. That means that there's some problem there, because if it is so important, then it should be a thing that's successful, right? So then we went through and reviewed some articles to try and find issues with sustainable business model innovation, and try and talk about them. So from all of the articles I reviewed, I came up with these 6 issues. And I'm going to be going through these again from left to right. So you have the triple bottom line, which is finding the balance between sustainability, benefits to the environment, society, and value for shareholders. This is essentially trying to benefit their sustainability actions with the profit making. And value for shareholders is essentially that, profit. Then you have resources, a lack of resources or the willingness to dedicate them. Oftentimes it can take a lot of manpower to transition everything to be a sustainable business model, or it can take a lot of money, and oftentimes there's a lack of that or the willingness to do it. Mindset is also a lack of innovation due to the preconceptions of a traditional business. So traditional businesses are just structured in a really kind of set way. There's a lot of information out there on how to make a traditional business, and so innovating upon a business model is very difficult. Technology innovation, also integrating sustainable technology, that can require a lot of resources again. Oftentimes companies will have to change their entire, manufacturing systems or things like that. And so that can often be a barrier for sustainable business model innovation. Methods and tools, there are many established business models, but there aren't really any business models that focus on sustainability, where sustainability is one of the core tenets of the business model. And so that also is a big problem for people trying to make a sustainable business model. And then external relations, an increase in the amount of frequency of external relations. Oftentimes, this involves things like having to recycle now, having to reuse different products, or things like that for companies that they didn't have to do before, that make it harder for them to actually be sustainable. So where does this leave us? Well, we firstly discussed how important sustainable business model innovation is. Business model innovation, again, is regarded as the most important type of innovation by a majority of executives, and sustainability is really crucial for long-term success. So we can now define sustainable business model innovation as innovation within the business model that changes the entirety of the business model to be structured around sustainability and helps the company gain its value and capture. We also identified 6 potential challenges that can be faced with sustainable business model innovation: the triple bottom line: resources, mindset, technology innovation, methods and tools, and external relations. But where do we go from here? Right now, one of the main problems is that there isn't that much research. That was one of the main findings of this study. And even though it's recognized as important, there isn't that much information on how to actually go about innovating your business in a sustainable manner and what exactly that might entail. So there isn't even a conclusive definition of sustainable business model innovation across the literature. I think that's the first thing that needs to happen. And then after that, there needs to be an updated framework that gives firms direction for sustainable business model innovation, while also taking into account the various challenges, because that happened once in 2003, and it's a bit outdated at this point. And yeah, that was my paper and my findings. I guess if you have any questions now, right,